Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Jim.
How you doing?
Fine, and you? Do you hear me well? Do you receive
Yes, I
me?
hear you great. No problem.
Okay, thanks.
What can I help you with?
So yeah, my first question is: we're in the '80s, and there's this new music. I'm speaking here of death metal.
Right.
Um, I was wondering what were the challenges of recording this type of music were, and what were the tricks back then you managed to develop? You think you and the Morrisound crew throughout your career?
Okay. Well, it was the the most difficult thing about recording extreme metal stuff is that if you ask anybody in the band, um, they think that every sound needs to sound huge, needs to be enormous. Well, of course, if everything is enormous, then nothing is enormous. So the real trick is to try to make something that came over a little 3-inch speaker in a boombox sound like it was coming out of a Marshall cabinet in the same room. So the what we found was that a lot of places these guys would go to record, they just thought this kind of music was stupid, and they didn't really put any time into it. I actually spent weeks trying to figure out the best way to mic up a Marshall cabinet with a loud amp and make it sound like it was loud, even if it was really quiet. So we spent a lot of time trying to develop methods for recording guitar amps and drums that would give the listener the feeling that this was a really, really big sound. Because once you add a bunch of big sounds together, like I said, nothing is then big. Everything is normal size. So we noticed that the musicians were sort of getting sidelined by other recording studios and recording engineers. I thought this is a perfectly valid kind of music. It's maybe new and different, but that doesn't make it any less valid than Frank Sinatra. It's just different, you know. So the real issue, the first thing was back in the early '80s, before we even started doing death metal, when we were just doing bands like Sabotage and Crimson Glory and stuff like that. We decided we needed to figure out methods for miking up guitar amps to make them sound really great, and that was the first thing we did. And then we realized later, when the death metal thing started up, that a lot of the music was basically played as fast as the people could play, and maybe even a little faster than they could actually play. So we figured out, well, we have to be able to help them somehow. We have to try to get what's in their heads onto a CD somehow. Um, and so there was lots of different techniques. Um, we back in those days, everything was recorded on analog tape, so it was all 24 track analog tape. And we found out, sometimes you have to record sections at a time. You can't record the whole song all the way through because it's physically too taxing in a studio to try to get it right. It's one thing to play a gig, a live show, and get all the way through the song. People are forgiving about little errors, but in the studio, there's no forgiving little errors. So we started doing 2-inch tape edits. You play the first verse, and then give me a couple of takes of the first verse, and then the first chorus and the second verse, and we started using a razor blade to slice everything together. Now it's easy with Pro Tools and just cut and paste edit. But with 2-inch tape, it's a very elaborate process that takes a long time. Um, so that plus, drummers were trying to play, especially that blast beat stuff that came out. It's really sort of beyond the ability, if you're playing that fast, to really play hard. But they want it to sound like they're playing hard, but they physically couldn't play it hard. So we had to figure out methods for drum replacement, which we now call triggering or whatever you want to call it, but no one had really done it before for anything like extreme metal. I mean, I mean, you can hear early versions of triggering on songs by Bruce Springsteen in the 80s, but that's not anything like what you do with a death metal band. Where that's 250 beats per minute, triplet 16th note kick drums. That's not easy. And our job was to try to help the band get the record that was in their heads onto the CD. And then it's their job after the record's made to do the live show. None of my business. So we had to develop methods doing drum replacements that are now seem, almost silly in hindsight with what we can do with Pro Tools, but and on a two-inch tape, no one's recording with a click track. No one has any kind of a grid to put their drums in it. I remember I used to eventually by the time the 90s rolled around, I was actually using a, a DOS version of Cakewalk to do drum programming. I was an endorsee at the time, and the band wasn't playing to a click, so I couldn't use any kind of a grid structure. But we would actually say, okay, he's playing 16th notes. There's 4 kick drums per quarter note. There's a snare every 2 quarter notes, so that's 8 subdivisions between snares. And I would actually get a calculator out and say, well, this number of frames is between 2 snare drums. Divide that by 8. That's how many frames apart each kick drum trigger needs to be. And I would use the math to create a kick drum event that's all sequenced properly between the hands. Generally, you didn't have to change anything with the hands, but some of these guys are playing stuff that's nearly humanly impossible. And you just that's what the music was in their head, so that's what we had to do. So had to develop a lot of different techniques, and some of them are lost in the mist of history, and that's a good thing. Nobody needs to know about them. But we were forced to do a lot of kind of stuff like that.
When you're speaking of drum replacement, you're replacing entirely the element of the drum. Let's say the kick drum.
Yeah. Initially it was mostly kick drums, and then you would just trigger a snare because on a blast beat, the snares would get really quiet, and they didn't want that. They wanted it to sound like they were still hitting it like an animal. So we would trigger a snare and add a snare drum into the main snare, but you'd replace the kick drums because often the timing wouldn't be exactly what the drummer really wanted. And our job is to make the drummer happy. So if we would smooth out, a kick pattern that was just a little faster than they could play, and then later on for their shows, they would be good at it and they could play.
So you're adding a snare trigger to the actual snare?
Yes.
And what was the process for this method?
Well, the way we did it at first, I used a digital delay line from a Danish company called TC Electronic. And they had a thing called a 2290 digital delay, which is a sampling delay. And I could load a snare drum into the sampler, edit the front and back of the snare drum, and then you would set it up so it would trigger on an input. And then I would gate the actual snare drum track and send a really short pop from each snare, and it would trigger the sampler. Later, that was in the 80s. Later, we were able to actually trigger into a MIDI sequencer at a higher, and generally, like I said, these guys didn't record to a tempo map. So I would just set up everything at 200 beats per minute. So I'd have high resolution on MIDI. Because back then it was, if I'm not mistaken, I had the early versions of Cakewalk. I think I was stuck at like 96 ticks per quarter note. Later, it went to 960, but originally my memory says they were like 96. So, an eighth note was 48 ticks. Well, that's not very accurate at a slow tempo. At a fast tempo, that's pretty accurate. So I would use a trigger, an actual trigger mechanism on the guy's snare or kick drum and record the triggers locked to SMPTE time code and then use a sampler. The early versions were like emulators or Akai S900s or S2000s, and then trigger samples in the MIDI domain. But there was no tempo maps, so guys didn't play to a click track at all back then. Now you would because you can, but they would. Most bands refuse to even try.
And why so?
Well, there's several reasons for why they couldn't/wouldn't play to a click track. It's a learned skill. So if you're in a band and you haven't tried playing to a click track, the worst time to do it is the day you go to the studio, because you need to practice with a metronome for months, maybe years to get good at it. Um, so it's not a case of, hey, we haven't played to a click track, so let's do it today. You can't do that. So the bands had no way to actually rehearse to a click track, so they never tried it. So some guys could do it. I remember the guys in the band Cynic, their drummer, Sean Reiner, could do it all day. He could play to a click track with no, like there's no tomorrow. He was fantastic. Um, Other guys who were equally as talented had never tried playing to a click track. So we're not going to try it now. It's too late. We're in the studio in 10 minutes. We can't learn now. So, and then several albums later, they would come in and say, yeah, I can play to a click track now, and now I'll try it. But it's not a talent issue. It's an experience issue. You got to do it a lot before you're good at it. Guitar players are the same way now. A lot of guitar players will try to play to a metronome their first time trying to play something complicated, and they just can't. And then the more they do it, the better they get at it, and then they won't want to play without a metronome, because it's liberating in a lot of ways. But in the early days of death metal, it was early days, and it was a brand new thing, and it was extreme. Basic guys were playing really beyond anything anybody had ever tried before. So none of us even suggested a click track until years later.
Right, thanks. You were talking about guitar sound. I agree with you that the guitar tone is maybe one of the most important thing in the recording of a death metal band. I was wondering, since this guitar tone is so important for the quality of the music, did you use by any chance DI tracks in order to reamp them afterwards to get a better tone?
Back in the 80s and early 90s, no, because you have to realize we were recording on 2-inch analog tape. So the tape hiss would kill you in an amp. By the time you take a nice clean DI, record it on analog tape, play it back through a Mesa rectifier, it's nothing but noise because the tape hiss gets loud. So doing DI tracks before Pro Tools was worthless.
Right. I found out during my research that several albums back then were mastered by George Marino. What was the process of mastering back then, and more especially in death metal?
Well, George Marino, to my knowledge, had never heard death metal before the day I showed up with Chuck Schuldiner to master Symbolic. The day before that, he had mastered a Barbra Streisand record. So it was a total eye-opening event. He put the record on, and was grinning from ear to ear. And he said, "Man, I needed this after yesterday." And he listened to his process was George Marino's process was he sat and listened to the whole album, which was, what is it, an hour long, whatever it was. Um, he just listened to it, didn't touch anything. And then he talked to me and Chuck, like say, how do you feel about the mixes? What do you think they need? What do you think they don't need? And Chuck and I were both very, very happy with the mixes. So we were like, hey, whatever you do, don't change it because we like it the way it is. And he said, okay, I think I got that. And he said, I have some suggestions for you. And he tried one song. He says, listen to this. And to me, it sounded great. It didn't sound really much different at all. And I'm like, well, whatever you're doing, it's not bad. So, and he said, well, I'm adding a dB and a half at 10,000 cycles. And I'm putting this kind of compressor on it in my Neve digital transfer console to get the levels up. And I'm like, great, do it. So that was one morning we spent from about 9 in the morning till about 1 in the afternoon. And the bill was $10,000. I mean, he was George Marino. He did Led Zeppelin. He did Barbra Streisand. He was a legend. And just having him say, I like this, this is what it needs, is a big confidence boost to a guy like me. In 1995, I was in my 30s doing records, and Chuck and I had just spent 2.5 months on this album when we were super proud of it. And it was nice to have that. I mean, it is essentially, it ended up being a waste of $10,000 because he didn't do much of anything. But the label loved it because they were now confident that this was good because George Marino said it's good. And that was a quality control issue that the record label was very into at the time. It was Roadrunner Records, and they were trying to have George Marino master everything. So they're the ones that told us to go to him. I never would have spent the money on George Marino. It was really awesome getting to meet him and work with him for one day. And I think he died like 4 years later, maybe 5. I don't know. It wasn't that long afterwards. And he was probably only 55 years old at the time. So, but that's that mastering. Mastering, changed quite a bit from the 60s to now. In vinyl, when we were doing only vinyl, mastering was a whole different process. And the big issue there was not how loud can you make it, but how can you get this thing onto two sides of a vinyl record and not have too much noise on the record. So, and you were limited by volume to how many minutes per side there were. The louder the record, the fewer minutes you could put on the record. So if you had an album that was 20 minutes per side, that's not as loud as an album that's 18 minutes per side. So when we started doing mastering for CDs only, it wasn't long before the record companies figured out, hey, we can make this really ridiculously loud. Well, it doesn't sound good loud, but they wanted it loud because they'd assumed that everybody likes things louder, even if they sound worse when they're louder. But that's just, mastering is something that you have to do. I've done a lot of it. I hate it. It's not fun for me at all. Often, I think at the volumes that the record labels want, I think it ruins the music.
Especially back then.
Yeah, especially back then. But now it's not much better. I mean, Apple Music and Spotify have asked us to turn records down. But, I mean, you listen to a Foo Fighter record, it's still loud. So, I mean, if you're Dave Grohl, you get it as loud as you want, period. You're royalty. You get it whatever you want. And that's great. He is royalty. But to me, it's the record labels assume that the fans can't find the volume knob. And if they would just let us turn our record up as loud as we want to listen to it, and have them all quieter so they had more dynamic range, music would sound better. But I'm I'm a dinosaur, so people don't nobody listens to me about that. I'm really glad that with Dolby Atmos and stuff like that, that Apple has pushed the volume down. They said, no, you can't have it above this level. And that when you do a mastered for Apple Music release, you can't have peaks above zero point 0.5 dB headroom. You have to have that much headroom at least. And they want the LUFS numbers to be down around minus 11 and 12. I think things sound great down there. Nobody does it, but they're supposed to.
What were the gear that you used back then, like the go-to mics, the go-to preamps? What were the monitors back then?
Well, in the earliest death metal records we did, nobody used outboard mic preamps. It was all the preamps in your console. So for most of the really big records, that would have been a solid state Logic 4000G. And before that, it was probably a console you never saw in Europe called a Sound Workshop. That we had a Series 34 Sound Workshop, and it sounded great. But this SSL 4000G mic preamps, I use those for hundreds of albums, and it was that console, those mic preamps that are in the console, onto an analog tape machine, a 24 track. We use Otari MTR 90s, the Japanese tape machine. We had four of them, so records like Symbolic were done as 48 track albums, two machines locked together.
Two in Studio A, two in Studio B, I guess.
Yes. And as far as microphones goes, on Marshall cabinets, I used to use four microphones. I would use two SM57s, each on a different speaker, one AKG 414, and one Sennheiser 441. And I had a very specific arrangement of how the microphones would get placed on the cabinet. And I spent a lot of time. You'd have to see it to understand how I did it. But I found the hot spots. Every speaker they're not scientifically good. The speaker, a 12-inch speaker, is not necessarily like something made by SpaceX or something. They're not really very accurate. So you can be in front of the one 12-inch speaker and then move the mic around, and the sound changes radically with it's like 5 centimeters over. It sounds totally different than it does over. So I would find the hot spots, put my mics where I wanted them, and then move them until I got the tone I wanted. And I would take all four of those mics and blend them to a track.
Did you have like headphones on?
I got this to find the hot spots. I did that with headphones on out. I just ran white noise through the amplifier. And back then I didn't have a white noise generator, so I used an FM radio, and I got between two stations, so it just made a hiss. And I would play that through the Marshall amp. So the amp was sitting there going, shh, it's making a loud hiss. It's really loud. And I would find the hot spots with the mics, mark the cabinets where the hot spots were, and then find them next, and that with a set of headphones right in front of the amp. Then once I found the hot spots, I would get the guy to play through the amp, and in the control room, I'd get a balance on the four microphones that I wanted. And sometimes I'd go back out and move one of the mics away from the hot spot until it warmed up the right way. And I would use the mic position as an equalizer, which is very different than using an equalizer. They're not the same. It doesn't sound anything like turning a knob on an EQ. Moving the mic around changes everything. So, and I got so that I could get somebody's cabinet. A guy would come in with a cabinet, and I could do it in half an hour to get it ready to go.
And how's that hotspots? How does it sound exactly?
I would look for the edgiest sound with that microphone. As I looking around until it got the sharpest edge, I would say, okay, that's the brightest spot. That has the low end won't be that good, but the top end is good. So I know that's the brightest I can make it. And then if I need it darker, I just move away from that spot, usually towards the edge of the speaker.
Okay, great, great, great. So the productions back then also get their vibe thanks to all the effects. I'm talking about fancy flangers, delays, and also synthesizers. Can you tell me more about the stuff you used back then?
Okay, so as far as special effects and outboard gear that we used, um, most of the, if you ever heard, there's not a lot of reverb on death metal records, but if so, it was all Lexicon reverbs. So pretty much exclusively, except for occasionally you'll hear an AMS RMX 16 on the non-lin sound for the snare drums. But then for delays, I used Lexicon PCM 42s, Lexicon Prime Times, TC Electronic 2290s. Those are the delays lines we would use. For flanging and chorusing, probably the most popular was the Eventide H3000. And then for chorusing, also a Lexicon PCM 70 had a good chorus program in it. That's probably the most amount of time-based effects. As far as outboard compression and stuff, there's really great mixing compressors built into a solid state logic console on the channels. So the channel compressors are fantastic, and there's no plugins today that still sound as good. But in the rack, we had DBX 165s, DBX 160s, Uri 1176s, and Uri LA4s and LA2s. But with death metal stuff, compression is like on the guitars. I just use the solid state logic console compressors on guitars. That's all I would use. For the vocals, later in the 90s, we started using uh, uh, a thing called a distressor, often Empirical Labs distressor, one of the best pieces of outboard gear ever made, but they weren't around in the early 90s. So we would use 1176 from Uri and the DBX 165, and we would use those a lot, both of them, sometimes together at the same, in the same time.
Right. What's the difference that you can point out between producing death metal right now and 30 years ago?
It's a different world now than it was in the early 90s. And the actual bands that there's not very many new death metal bands. I mean, I got a chance to work on the last Obituary record, and those were old friends of mine, and they're great guys. And I mixed the Dolby Atmos mix of their new record. It was great. We had a lot of fun with the Tardy brothers, and they're just really good people. And I've known them since 1985. So, and I still do mixing for a lot of bands around the world. Sometimes I never meet them. They just send me their stuff and I mix it. And that's always fun. I would rather record the whole thing, but that's not always possible anymore. But it's, I still do it whenever possible. I do a lot of I do more, I guess, like power metal type stuff than death metal these days, melodic stuff. But we still do occasionally with a death metal band will come through, and it's some of them are guys I've known for 30 years. Some of them are there's a few new guys that come through, but it's always interesting. In fact, not too long ago, I had a session with a guy named Bobby that played lead guitar on Symbolic, and I had him come in and play on just a straight metal thing, and I hadn't seen him since Symbolic, and it was great seeing him. And we're both old guys now, but I still remember. I have a great picture of him and Chuck and I in the control room when he was cutting his solos on that album, and he's a super cool guy. So it's always good to see old friends. It's just easier now because of using computers for everything. And it is made easier when the band can play to a metronome. That makes everything easier. It doesn't necessarily seem that way to some people right at first, but it really makes the job a lot faster. And certainly editing of guitars and drums and basses are way easier in Pro Tools than they were on 2-inch tape. So it's faster, easier. Um, it's not as new of an art form. In the early 90s, it was all nobody was doing it before that. So anytime anybody came up with a new idea, I was like, that's really cool. And now it's sort of like a legendary thing, and people don't want to change their style. I find it that's kind of depressing. I wish people would be more open to new things, but hey, yeah, that's just me.
So let's dive in.
Yeah.
Last time we talked, we were talking about the recording in the modern day. So you were talking about the latest Obituary album, which was mixed in Atmos. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, their live sound engineer mixed the stereo version, and
Mm-hmm.
and he did a great job. It sounds really killer. But the guys came to us and we're looking at trying to try a few new things. So their live sound guy who'd mixed the record sent me the files, and we were able to kind of do the thing you do often with Dolby Atmos mixing is you make sure that it still has the same feel as the stereo mix. So you have to make a lot of comparisons, but the idea is to spread it out and make it totally immersive. There's things behind you, there's things above you, and so that was a lot of fun, and the guys really enjoyed it. And it's I think heavy metal music is a great art form for immersive audio because it's so theatrical and lends itself well to a total immersive format. So that was we spent a little bit of time. I did prep work on all the songs, and then the guys came in and we hung out for a while and spent a couple of days tweaking up the mixes and trying things that they might want to try spatially, having things pan around above their heads and behind them and stuff. And it was a lot of fun.
Right. And on a technical point of view, like what are the main guidelines of an Atmos mix, especially in death metal?
Well, the cool thing about Atmos is there's not many guidelines really.
Yeah, yeah.
You can
But
pretty much do almost anything you want.
yeah,
The biggest issue that Dolby has is volume. You can't have it super loud because that goes against the way the codec works. So I don't have a problem with that. I know where the volume control is, so I can always turn it up. So that means you get to you keep some of the dynamics that are in the final recording. A lot of times in modern releases, they slam up so loud that there's no more transients left, and stuff just sounds kind of squashed. So with Dolby Atmos, both Dolby and Apple are really pushing it to be lower levels. So the only real guideline for me in was to make sure that the guys still felt like it was the same album, that I hadn't changed the feel of any of the songs, that they still felt like this, the way they wrote the songs and played them. And so there were a few like fade in, fade out kind of things that I had to sort of duplicate from the stereo mix. But that was easy. And the biggest thing about Dolby Atmos is that like we're sort of at the beginning of this, and there's not a whole lot of restrictions yet. Eventually, people are going to start complaining about stuff, and then we'll have to change what we're doing. But right now, we can sort of do whatever you want, and nobody
yeah.
has anything to say about it.
Right, great. Speaking of the new version of Morrisound, I saw that you're recording the band in the control room. Why is that so?
Yeah, well, when we sold our other building in 2014, whenever it was, 11 years ago, um, originally I wasn't going to build another studio. I was just going to build a mixed room. And so we actually had a mixed room set up in my brother's house. And I thought maybe I would just mix stuff, but I missed tracking a lot. So I was starting to track in people's home studios, and they didn't have all their stuff that I wanted. Not they didn't have the right microphones, the right mic preamps, and the environment was bad. So we decided, okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to build a new studio. And I found this old building, and one thing that had happened in the old studio, uh, unless we were recording drum tracks or a full orchestra, we didn't really need the big giant room anymore. Um, so in tracking at people's home studios, often we did a lot of work with a laptop computer and a rack full of equipment just sitting in their house tracking and sitting right next to the musicians. And I actually kind of got to like it a lot. I thought the communication is a lot different than
Yeah.
looking through a glass window and hitting a button to talk. And it's sort of that's sort of an isolating sort of thing, but that's what I was used to for all the years. And then we found this building, and it's not big enough to have a big recording room and a big control room. So we I had been to Peter Gabriel's studio in the UK, and he has a giant solid state logic console in the middle of a tracking room. And I'm like, you know what? If Peter Gabriel can do it, damn it, I should try it
Yeah.
because I'm a big fan. So we actually set it up this way so I can track drums in one of the isolation booths, but I prefer to do it right out in the room in front of me, and I'll wear my in-ear monitors, and I'm just kind of sitting in the middle of the band, and I think it's more fun for me. I enjoy it, and it certainly is a slightly more relaxed environment, I think, for the musicians. I had a band in here last Friday. A big blues band, actually. It was really cool. And there was a keyboard player behind me sitting on the couch. There was the drums were out in the main room. There was a singer in one of the ISO booths because you have to do that still, and then guitar player and bass player standing around. So we're all in the same. We're all kind of experiencing it at the same time, and there's a lot more easy communication when you do that way.
Yeah. So no wasting time doing a mix for everyone.
Yeah. Well, we have a system here that's a 16 channel headphone rig. So everybody gets their own mixer anyway. But even so, just talking to each other is easier if you're all in the same room.
Mm-hmm. Great. I also saw that you're using. I think you're only using a pair of Genelecs as monitors.
Yeah, that's a Genelec 8050B.
Yeah.
And we actually have 7 of them because that's the part of the lower part of the surround. And then in the ceiling, we have 8020s, Genelec 8020s, and that's the height speakers for Atmos. So those you probably can't see in pictures, but but that's I used to use back in the 80s and 90s. I mixed a lot of records on Yamaha NS10s, and then on my big speakers. And then in the 90s, Yamaha stopped making NS10s, and they also stopped making the parts. And what I found was with the NS10, if you use them every day, you got to replace the tweeters and woofers about every 6 months because they just get tired and they start to sound different. So when Yamaha said, we're no longer going to make those parts, I tried to find a supply of spare parts, and there was a studio in Miami that had bought all of the spare parts because that guy, the guy who owned it loved the NS10 and he never wanted to be without it. So he went into Yamaha and he bought their entire supply of spare parts. So now the rest of us were like, I can't use those. So I spent about 6 years probably looking for another monitor that could sort of replace the NS10 for me. And I tried Mackeys, I tried KRKs, I tried Adams, I tried Tannoys, I tried a bunch of different stuff. And I ended up with a set of Genelec 1031s. And those I really liked until they stopped making those. So in about the mid 2000s or maybe late 2000s, I realized I needed a monitor that I could get parts for. So I just went to the next Genelec, which was the 8050. That was the one that replaced the 1031. And it was a little different, but I got used to them really fast. And I can listen to them all day and not get tired. So that's the current monitor I use the most.
Right. And are you using any software room correction or something? No.
No, I've never even tried those things. That's I'm kind of suspicious of that stuff. Yeah. So I mean, the nice thing about my room here is it's the best sounding mix room we've had. And mixes, when I do them here and I go out to somebody's car, the translate's fantastic. So I don't really need that kind of feature because my room sounds really good the way it is. My brother did a great job of designing the acoustics in the room, and the room sounds very natural, and it's a very honest room, so I feel comfortable using it without any kind of corrections.
Right.
I did have to make some adjustments for my subwoofers because it's such a big room that I had to have 2 Genelec subwoofers.
All right.
And I discovered when I was setting them up that the Genelec manual was wrong about the settings if you use 2 monitors. And I actually had the guy from Genelec come here and I said, look, here, I set it up just like you told me. And he goes, wow, it doesn't work. I'm like, yeah, maybe we should call the guys in Denmark and see what's going on. So we actually did call the guys in Denmark and they were like, oh, yeah, that's not the way you set it up. Just try this. And there was a different set of settings and they've probably fixed it in their manual by now. But we discovered that with the 2 subwoofers, there was a couple of switch settings that had to be different. And it works great now.
And where are they placed in the room exactly?
Say that again, sorry?
Where are they located in the room?
They're basically right in front of and below the SSL console.
Right, okay. Okay.
They're basically in the same plane as the 8050s are.
Right. Okay, thanks. Yes, this is interesting question, I guess. At the end of the Death by Metal documentary, you said that putting the second Control Denied album would require a tremendous amount of work. And what makes this so difficult?
Well, the second Control Denied record is not finished.
Yeah.
So the problem is there's only Shannon, the other guitar player, has demos that Chuck did.
Okay, I thought the album was...
So he has to learn all of Chuck's guitar parts, rhythm guitar parts, because I only have 4 songs from Chuck. I have the drums for the whole album, but Shannon has to actually play all of Chuck's parts, and he's the guy that Chuck wanted to do it. So, and then we'll probably have to have Shannon and or maybe Bobby, who played on Symbolic, to do the solos. Chuck always loved the way Bobby played, so that's probably the guy we're going to get. But if it ever happens, and that's kind of up to the family.
Yeah.
We would actually have to get Steve DiGiorgio down here from California to play the bass parts. But I think he has heard the songs anyway. Whether he, so that's really kind of up in the air until the family's ready to do it.
Okay, so it's more like an artistic issue than a technical issue.
Yeah, I mean, we have, like I said, we have the final drum tracks, but we don't have. There's no way to duplicate Chuck's home recording because when he went and after he got ill, he tried to record some stuff on the hard disk recorder in his house, and the hard drives got wrecked.
Ah, yeah.
And the recovery of the files was not accurate, so the timing doesn't match.
Right.
So we're gonna have to actually get Shannon to replay the parts.
And do you think, by any chance, in the future, like AI would solve some of these technical issues?
No.
Never.
No, I don't think so. Because it's there's first I would say this also. Chuck would never want that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So that's just not something he would have. If he was alive today and and I told him, hey, well, we got a computer to finish your record, he would probably slug me.
Yeah.
So that's not going to happen.
Definitely, yes. Right. I saw on Reddit. I have here several several pieces of information. I don't know if they're correct, but I saw on Reddit that, and I quote, "You assisted Chuck on stage with certain parts during the final Death shows in Florida." And I also noticed on the Metal Archives website that you have songwriting credits on the Symbolic album. If this is true or partly true,
I never did any kind of performing with Chuck.
Yeah,
on a stage.
I came across this, so I was interested. But anyways, can you tell me more about your artistic inputs throughout your career?
Well, you mean with Chuck or just in general?
In general, or with Chuck?
Well, every artist has a different relationship with a producer and an engineer. It's different for everybody. There's no two bands that I ever work with the same way. Sometimes the artist just wants you to stay quiet and stay out of the way and give them good sounds and be to work on time and follow their vision. And then sometimes on the other end of the spectrum, they're looking for a musical partner. They're looking for someone to help them with, maybe it's music theory on something, and maybe they're looking for some harmony part help or melodies, or sometimes some artists are actually like, hey, help me write this song, I couldn't finish it. So it's everything in between. And there's no two artists that you ever work with the same way. And so for me, it's all fun. I have no trouble at all, just kind of being the technical staff, and I also really enjoy getting involved creatively. So it's all good to me. It's all about, what does the artist want/need? Do they need the help? Do they want the help? If they need it and don't want it, then you still got to not do it, because that's not what they paid you. They pay you to do what they want. If they need it and are interested in help, that's a lot of fun, and that's something I've always been willing to do. Sometimes on a regular basis, it'll be helping out with a harmony idea or an arrangement thing or a drum part that's awkward for somebody, or figuring out a way to record two parts of a song that don't really go together very well and trying to make them work together. That's kind of regular, everybody, and when you get in the studio, that's when you really find out what you didn't figure out yet. So that's kind of a normal thing. But there are artists that I work with where, the best thing to do is just stay out of the way and make sure that nothing else gets in the way either.
Right, great. And is the songwriting info about symbolic true or not? I saw that you had songwriting credits for the symbolic album. Is that true in any way?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I think, it's been a long time since we did symbolic. I think it's likely that I played an acoustic guitar on one spot of the song, and there may have been a guitar harmony that I played because I was showing it to Chuck, and he goes, "Hell, you just play it. You got it." And handed me his guitar, and I played. That's possible.
Okay.
I know I did that on the Control Denied record also. But
okay.
I mean, Chuck and I doing symbolic, that was so much fun. I mean, we really had a great time, and we got along so well. Anything that he wanted me to do, I would have done without any question. So, and it's been 30 years now since we did the record. So I'm sure there's stuff that I've forgotten.
Right, thanks. We're talking about Symbolic and Control Denied, but you also contributed to The Sound of Perseverance, which is Death's last album.
Yeah.
Personally, it's my favorite. One thing I love about this album is the guitar tone. Can you tell me more about that? I think, I'm not sure, but are the leads like double tracked or?
Some of them are and some of them aren't. The rhythm guitars, there's 4 of them.
Yeah, that's
all Chuck, and there's no foot pedals being used. That's just Chuck and his stealth guitar right into his valve state, which is a very unique sounding valve state. They don't sound like most of the other. I have one myself. Doesn't sound like Chuck's.
All right.
It's the same age too. Chuck's was a 50 watt, I think, and mine is 100 watt, and his 50 watts sounded better. But it's we didn't use any kind of gain pedal, distortion pedal, or anything. It's all right. His guitar plugged straight into the amp, and he was very meticulous about being accurate in playing double tracks and quad tracking. So we spent the most amount of time on the record probably on the rhythm guitars.
Yeah, that can be heard. And when you're speaking of quad tracking, do you like hard pan 2 tracks on the left and on the right, or do you split them across the stereo image?
I hard pan them much as I can, as much as the artist will let me get away with, because I want to leave a hole in the middle for the bass and the drums and the vocal. And to me, I love music that feels 3-dimensional. So you got 2 speakers, you should use them.
Yeah.
So I hard pan everything if I can. I mean, as wide of a difference as possible.
Okay. The question about the artistic inputs. Do you think that today we're leading more towards the artistic contributions as a recording engineer than before?
That's an interesting question, but I would still say it's totally dependent on the artist. Yeah. I have artists that I work with today that it's exactly like it always was. Just stay out of the way, give them the sounds they asked for, and make it easy to play, but don't get in their way artistically. And other artists where I'm actually contributing songwriting. So I don't think it's a matter of now versus 30 years ago being any different. It's the artist that's the difference. So I don't think there's any. I mean, yeah, the technology makes it a little easier to do things. You can do a lot of stuff at home you couldn't do back in the day. But the actual musicians are the same people. So, I mean, they're 30 years younger, but there's no, and it's all fun. I mean, I totally enjoy getting involved all the way into the songwriting part of it. And I also totally enjoy just being a technical facilitator, somebody who can make it happen for them and stay out of their way. Those are both fun jobs, and everything in between is fun. So it's the artist that makes the difference, not the decade.
Right. Okay. I read Scott Barnes' biography that came out like 2 years ago, and I came across several examples of albums that ended up sounding bad or not finished because of the interference from the band and the label. Is it still the case today? Like, is the label still a part of an album not sounding good in the end?
Well, boy, that's a good question. First off, the labels aren't as important as they used to be because a lot of bands are self-financing and self-delivering, and they don't need a label. So that's a different question, though. I have had record labels completely interfere with the making of a record. Sometimes they were right, sometimes they were wrong. Sometimes the guy at the label has the best interest of the band at heart, and he's like, no, you guys need to do this, it's not good enough yet. Sometimes the guy at the label he used to have a band and he wants to still have a band, and he can't, it's not, he just wants everybody to do it his way. And sometimes they're right. So sometimes they're wrong. I've seen it kind of all directions. I've seen record labels and our guys rescue an album that was going bad because the artist had a weird issue or just didn't have the right attitude or the right vision for their own record. And I've seen the opposite happen where the artist knew exactly what they wanted and the record label ruined it. That's just human beings. That has nothing to do with whether it's a label or not a label. I've seen inside of a band, one person can wreck a record. So, and they're all in the same band. So that's just human nature. From my position while working on an album, it can be really awkward when somebody who's not there every day starts giving directions like, no, you should do this. And they didn't know why we did it the other way. Again, it totally depends on the circumstance. I mean, like I said, I've seen record labels fix a record that was wrong, and I've seen them wreck a record that was right. So it's just people.
And I think it also is a matter of money and budgets.
Yeah, that's, I mean, and of course, record label budgets are smaller than they have been in years. So that's, and often a band will come in on a label and they'll still have to self-finance. The label won't contribute much money at all to the actual record. And you go, well, if you're not paying for it, why are you telling us how to do it? But sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. The record budgets are lower than they've been. It's not like it used to be 30 years ago or 25 years ago. And so it's an interesting time. I would kind of hate to be working at a record label right now. It doesn't seem like it's necessarily the best future, but I could be wrong. They could turn the whole thing around and it would be great again. I don't know what's going to happen.
Right. So I see that we're reaching the 10 last minutes of this interview. So I have a few quick questions.
Sure.
So the first one is, do you have any experience in live sound?
In what, sorry?
In live sound.
Yeah, from a long time ago. From the early 1980s when Morrisound first opened, we also had a PA company. And I did front of house for some small tours. I did um, uh, a bunch of shows with Ray Charles and with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band and with the Dave Brubeck jazz band, with Freddie Fender and the Pointer Sisters and a bunch of artists in the early 80s. And then I realized that this was not what I ever wanted to do.
So you never did it again.
I just kind of hated it.
All right. Yeah.
I just, and then I also realized that as a PA company, we were getting paid the same as the lighting company. And the lighting company would get there hours after we got there and be leaving hours before we got to leave. And no one ever told them that the lights sounded bad.
Yeah.
So I just realized, this is not the business I want to be in. I don't want to do this. I respect the hell out of the guys who do it. And, I got friends that do it. But just not something I ever wanted to do. I'm glad I got out of it when I did. So I've been out of it now for 40 years.
All right. Okay. Yeah. But you learned how to mix a band live, I guess, and then before doing studio stuff.
It's kind of happened at the same time as being in the studio.
Right.
There are some similarities. Obviously, a guitar is a guitar, a drum kit's a drum kit. Making things sound good on a 3-inch speaker is very different from making things sound good on a line array in a stadium.
Yeah.
And there's an entirely different mindset you get into. I prefer the studio environment, but some of the skills are very similar. I think somebody with a really good ear that's creative can do a great job in either venue. Like I said, the guy that mixes Obituaries tours is the guy that mixes their stereo albums, and he's great. Yeah. Does a really good job.
And he's done like 3 or 4 albums with them.
Yeah,
already.
yeah.
So yeah, okay.
Great guy. He's a great guy too.
Right. Now, which death metal album are you the most proud of that you've done in your career?
Am I the most proud of?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Well, Symbolic is my favorite one. So, I really enjoyed the process of making Gallery of Suicide with Cannibal Corpse. Those guys were a lot of fun to work with, and I enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun. And Symbolic was probably my favorite death metal album of all time. It's one of the most melodic ones. I like Sound of Perseverance also, but Symbolic was just is my favorite set of songs and everything from a death metal album. I really loved it.
Right. And which non-death metal album are you the most proud of that you produced?
The most proud of,
or happy with,
that's a much harder question, because I've done more other kinds of records than I have just death metal. So, man, I don't know that I can answer that. I don't know that I can answer that question.
And nothing like that comes to mind, even if
well, about 10 albums come to mind. That's the problem, and I can't pick one.
Right.
I will say the most fun I ever had, this is not exactly what you asked me, but the most fun that I ever had making an album was with a band called Wicked Mariah, and we did an album called Cycles in 1994. And we did it partially in Los Angeles, partially in Germany, and partially in Tampa. And that was the most fun. The guys in the band were hilarious. They were really funny guys, and they were just really great people to be around. And I know they don't have a band anymore. They haven't in a long time, but that album was the most fun I ever had with anybody, and I've had a lot of fun with a lot of people. Um, Let me think. I I guess I think the most impact that any work I ever did had on the industry is probably um, the Savatage album Sirens,
Oh yeah,
which was came out in I want to
yeah,
say 83 or 82. Um,
maybe around that time.
and
Yes.
it was my second time working with John and Chris Oliva, and we did the entire album in 4 days, start to finish. Um, I was the engineer, not the producer. That was produced by Dan Johnson. Um, but just working with Chris and John, uh, we were all really young at the time. But that record probably had the most impact on my career of any album, and it was one of the earliest albums I ever did.
Yeah. Right. And now, what is your favorite album record of all time?
You mean not one that I recorded?
Not one that you did. One that you
My
admire.
favorite album of all time.
That one that comes to mind because
Yeah, well,
everybody's
the
got
first
10.
one that comes to mind would be
Yeah.
"So" by Peter Gabriel.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
That's my favorite album of all time.
All right. Well, Jim, thanks for all, and take care.
All right, take care. Good luck.
Goodbye. Thanks.
Bye bye.